All right, greetings everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Bible study tonight. This is going to be a continuation to a series we're doing for the holidays. We're in the Tuesday night closest to the holiday that I can afford to do it. I am trying to take a look at that particular holiday and understand what, as Christians, we should. What is expected of us. For example, we looked at Halloween and we discussed the question of why I quit celebrating Halloween and gave you reasons from the Bible why I believe everyone should walk away from Halloween. We looked at Thanksgiving and why I choose to celebrate Thanksgiving, because it is a choice. And so hopefully you followed these studies, because I'll be building upon the principles. Each time we've done this, we've built upon the principles of the last of these lessons. So I would encourage you, if you haven't listened to those other messages, to go listen to those as well. As tonight, we're going to talk about why do we celebrate Christmas. Last time we talked about why I choose personally to celebrate Thanksgiving. Now we're going to talk about why as Christians in general, why do we celebrate Christmas? And I know for a lot of people who watch this, it must be people didn't like me saying something bad about Halloween, because about the time that caught up with all of you, since I'm 20 seconds ahead of you at least, I started seeing my numbers tick down fast of who was watching. All right, all jokes aside, many of you, this is going to be a strange question. Why do we even have to ask this? Why do we ask the question of why do we celebrate Christmas? The thing is, it is a question, and it's actually a legitimate question of should Christians celebrate Christmas or not. And so let me set up this a little bit by helping you understand why some people even ask this. Let me first of all, as I give just a second for people to get back in for whatever happened there that kicked out the numbers. But as I give you all a chance to get back, I want to just greet everyone and say thank you to everyone who's here. I appreciate you being here to be a part of the study with us. I see a good number of you in the comments already. But anyways, saying that, asking the question, why do Christians celebrate Christmas, or should Christians celebrate Christmas? It stems from the fact that while most of Christendom, most everybody who claims the name of Christianity in some form will celebrate Christmas and believe in it, there are people out there who don't, and they have a legitimate question concerning whether or not we should celebrate Christmas. Now, there are places where they come from, and let me be upfront that I am someone who does celebrate Christmas. Our church celebrates it. I celebrate it. You probably could figure that out pretty quick. But in case there's any question about it, let me make it clear that I do. And I'll explain to you why I do. But I do want to give respect to the fact that those who don't typically have a reasonable reason to not do it. And so now, having said that, let's talk about why. Now, the issue of why typically comes down to the fact that people in general are not against celebrating the birth of Christ. There are some out there who are. Usually they're part of movements that are already off on a lot of things doctrinally anyways. They're part of movements who try to de-emphasize Jesus, or they're people who are just strongly anti-Catholic, and so they associate anything about the birth of Jesus with Catholicism. But typically those two are the ones who are against the birth of Jesus at all. Don't celebrate it. The ones who are reasonable and have a good reason to at least ask the question come from a group of people who look at the roots of Christmas. Where does it come from? Because something you have to understand, and hopefully if you're part of the last study, you already understand this, God doesn't command Christians to celebrate any holidays. There is no holiday in the Bible that a church, any New Testament believer is ever commanded to celebrate. Israel had theirs, but in the New Testament we're told not to let any man judge you concerning holidays, new moons, Sabbaths, and so forth. That's not a commandment that God expects of us. Now, to understand the relationship of how things are in the New Testament, most everything God intended to be done by a holiday is done. The important parts are done by the two church ordinances we have, baptism and the Lord's Supper. They get us on track spiritually and keep us on track spiritually. The holidays did that a lot for Israel. A lot of it was about reminding their children about certain events in their past that God had done for them. And so as Christians, there's a lot of things we can learn from that, but God doesn't command us to celebrate any holiday. In fact, to the contrary, he very specifically in Romans 14 tells us that if you regard the day, you regard it to the Lord. If you don't regard it, you don't regard it as unto the Lord. It's up to you. If you see a day and you see something about that day that's special that you want to give God glory that day, then have fun with it. If you don't, then don't. And it's part of a passage wherein he's discussing standards and the whole concept that, when two people disagree on standards, they need to be able to step back and in spiritual maturity realize that we don't have to agree 100% on some of these things. Now, there's some things we need to stand on and we need to agree. Those are ones that are more linked to doctrine, though. More linked to clear biblical teaching. Whereas when you start getting a little bit on the fringe of it and it's, my understanding versus your understanding, God says there has to be a point where we just come together in understanding. And what I mean by that is he tells us that if one has a standard and the other does not, the one who has the standard is not allowed to condemn the one who does not, meaning they're not allowed to say, well, if you love God more, you would do this. You must not be saved because you don't do this. Whereas the one who doesn't have the standard is not allowed to despise the one who does. And so typically what you find is when somebody has a higher standard, even whether it's right or wrong, when they have it, those who don't despise the person who does. It's like, you think you're better than me. You think you love God more than I do. And so that those two things, you see them in practice a lot, but God warns us not to do that. So going with those ideas, that principle is not commanded. If you disagree, let's agree to disagree. With that in mind, let's consider why some people really are adamantly against Christmas. They believe that you are committing sin to celebrate it. It's wrong to celebrate it. Their logic stems entirely from the fact that when you trace the roots of Christmas, why we celebrate it December 25th, it comes down to pagan holidays. That traditionally, and this is why I don't build my doctrine off of this kind of stuff, is because people are going to argue about this for all their life. And someone who, for example, with Halloween, I didn't build my arguments about Samhain or any of that kind of stuff. I didn't go into the history. I don't even try. I know that that's not even the proper pronunciation of the word. It's just the pronunciation people know. But anyways, I don't base my doctrine off of that. I base my doctrine off the fact that it's an evil holiday. You can see it in the way it's practiced and things that are visible with your eyes today, not history that people are going to debate on that's not included in the Bible itself. So what I'm saying about that is, if I was to try to convince somebody against Halloween using the history only, then if they want to celebrate it, they're going to ignore that. And they're going to find an alternate history that agrees with their views of it. So I don't base my doctrine off of the history of this or this. I look at how I personally regard the day and what I can get from the Bible about that day. Now, having said that, I do understand why some people, when they look back at the past, and as far as we can see historically, there have been a lot of pagan holidays, a lot of other religious holidays celebrated at December 25th in that time frame, because you have the winter solstice, it's the shortest time of the year, and so forth. There's always been a lot of holidays celebrated around that time. There's a lot of pagan ones. We definitely can see the influences come into modern Christmas practices. So there's no question about the fact that a lot of your modern Christmas traditions are where, especially the Catholic Church, but Christianity in general can get a finger pointed at it, have went into these countries that had their Yule traditions and borrowed from that and essentially married their religion together with the other to create what you have. So knowing that, there is reason. There's logical reason to be against, let's say, parts of Christmas. And that's where I fall to on this. I'm not against celebrating Christmas. I believe it's perfectly fine to celebrate Christmas, because Christmas, we're celebrating the birth of Christ. Now, if it makes you mad that the word Christmas means Christ Mass, and so you say, okay, you're celebrating a Catholic holiday. Again, the Catholics are not the only ones who believe Jesus was born in the flesh, nor that he was born of a virgin. All of us in Christianity who believe the Bible believe Jesus was born in the flesh and he was born of a virgin. If you don't like the name Christmas because it's Christ Mass, then call it something else. If you don't want, and this is where I really come down to, I'll explain why I believe all this, but I want to get it out there in the beginning that my belief is, if you don't want to call it Christmas, call it something else. Call it the Nativity, call it whatever you want. People already do that. People already call it other things. Just like those, there's the debate of calling Easter Easter or the resurrection. We understand we're celebrating the resurrection. We just call it Easter because that's what we're used to. But if you want to really, split hairs over that, then call it something else. If you don't want to celebrate it December 25th because of the fact that there are pagan traditions and holidays and stuff associated with that day, celebrate it another time. If the argument is that Jesus was very unlikely to have been born in December, in fact, everything about the birth of Jesus points to him having been born around September. There have been people who've done their studies, they've traced it back and used the information we know about the course of priests and when certain priests would have been serving in certain places to, considering Zacharias and so forth, the ones that we know what they're doing and where they're serving. There have been people who are highly intelligent who've been able to go back through records and determine that at that particular year, it should have been September, would have been when Jesus was born. And that's great. I'm happy for him. Logic would dictate that to some degree. Most people come to that conclusion based off of the fact that the shepherds are still in the field at nighttime. So there's a lot there to be looking at that would point to September. I heard somebody make the comment about it the other day that, in fact, it was Brother Knox. I've been listening quite a bit lately, so I got a few things from him. But I was laughing at it that he pointed out that if Jesus was born in September, he was conceived in December. So if you're celebrating December, maybe you're celebrating the conception and not the birth. Now, he was making fun of it because he falls more in the category, I believe. I haven't listened to his beliefs on Christmas enough, but I believe he falls more in the category of people who don't celebrate. But having said that about it, the fact is, if that's the logic, if the issue is that you don't want to celebrate it in December, celebrate it another day. I'm not telling you that you have to celebrate Christmas at all, much less that you have to call it Christmas or that you have to celebrate it in December. You can celebrate it whenever you want. I mean, you're going to have a hard time, like as a church, if you decide you're going to celebrate it and you pick another day, you'll have a hard time getting people to understand why. You'll spend a lot of time, you'll use up a lot of energy trying to teach people why we're doing that this other time of the year. In fact, in that situation, it's probably easier just to not celebrate it at all. And I would give you that. But my point is, it's not wrong to celebrate the birth of our Savior. Now, is it wrong to celebrate it on a time of the year that has traditionally been used by pagans? That's the question we aim to answer a little better tonight. So that's what we're going to be studying. We're going to be mostly in 1 Corinthians 10. I'm going to use that as the foundation to get a good answer to this, because the truth is, it's a reasonable question. It is a very fair question, and God deals with the concept quite a bit in the Bible, especially in the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians at least, that we should ask. If there's paganism, idolatry, or anything associated to the day, the feast, or whatever it is, should Christians be involved with it? And God actually gives you some pretty strong and fixed rules about this. And so I'm going to give those to you, and then I'm going to let you answer for yourself. Do you believe that this gets in the way of celebrating Christmas, or do you believe that your celebration of Christmas falls within those rules? Because that's really what it comes down to. So 1 Corinthians 10, 23 through 33. 1 Corinthians 10, 23 through 33 says, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify, all things edify not. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. Whatsoever is sold in shambles, eat that eat, asking no question for conscience sake. For the Lord is the Lord, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no questions for conscience sake. If I'm really struggling to read tonight, I don't know my light is always right behind my monitor, but for some reason tonight it's really messing with my vision. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? For if I by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I gave thanks? Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. Give none offense, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. Now, staying on this passage, like I said, this is where we're going to get our foundation from. This is where we're going to try to understand, because the only real issue that I can see someone bringing about celebrating Christmas and whether or not Christians should be involved in it really comes down to the fact of its connections to Catholicism and paganism, and the traditions that have been attached to it because of that. And this is the passage I think best answers that. Now, we studied Colossians 2 last time when we discussed the idea of choosing a holiday, Colossians 2, 16, 17. So I'm not going to go there, but that's a passage for you to consider. We talked about Exodus 12, 22 through 27. In fact, we talked about several passages that speak to the idea that a holiday that you choose to celebrate should be one that allows you to highlight certain things about God and teach those things to your family and your children. So in terms of, is Christmas a holiday worthy of celebrating, before we ever get into this, on the surface, the answer should seem to be yes, because the whole point of Christmas is that we're choosing to celebrate the birth of our Savior, how Christ came in the flesh, that he is Emmanuel, God with us. And there's so much doctrine and so many important things being taught in there. Even, as you teach the meaning of Christmas, you always should come to the cross as well. So there's so much there. If we were to try to argue that we shouldn't highlight the birth of Jesus because the emphasis should be on the cross, well, then you would have the issue that God chose to include that part of his life in the Bible. There's a reason why from 12 to 30, God doesn't talk about it, because that's not relevant to him being the Messiah. That was a period of time that was spent, personally, I believe, theoretically taking care of Mary and his stepbrothers. And so as Joseph theoretically passed away early, the Bible never says it, but he's never mentioned again. So it's implied. The fact that he's called the carpenter and not the carpenter's son all the time. Sometimes he's called one, sometimes the other, would seem to mean that, some people still remember Joseph, some people remember Jesus as the carpenter. So it would seem that he worked as the carpenter, taking care of the rest of the family until the time that it was time for him to go forward and do that earthly ministry. But my point is not that. You can debate what he did in that time. The point is that God didn't include that in the Bible. He wrote 4 gospels to tell you the life of Jesus, and none of them talk about that period of time because it was irrelevant to your doctrine or to him qualifying as the Messiah. Yet when it comes to the birth of Jesus, is spoken of in great detail in 2 gospels and mentioned at least in some degree throughout the rest, and even in other books. Galatians goes into it, other books of the Bible go into it. It's not dropped after it's given to us in just the historical context. You have many prophecies in the Old Testament about it. So the birth of Christ is not something that can be ignored and put aside and treated small. In fact, I would say that someone doing that is someone who is more spiritually immature than they probably realize, because they are trying to negate it because they don't understand what all doctrines are there, why it's so important that we understand his birth. Now, saying all of that, let's go ahead though and get into this passage and understand, because I say on the surface, the answer of is this a holiday where I'm keeping the focus on God and teaching a certain attribute or aspect of God to my children? Absolutely, if you're doing it right. Now, there's a lot of ways you can do it wrong, but we'll get to that later. So back to the passage, though, the question about whether or not celebrating Christmas, considering its pagan roots and its Catholic roots, if that puts you in a place where you're participating in idolatry. So let's look at verse 23 again. It says, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. So I love this statement. It's one that actually appears more than once in the writings of Paul, but I really love it because it gives you so much understanding of what God actually expects of Christians. And the idea of the statement is this, that in terms of legally, like, am I going to have to worry about giving an account to God on legal ground because of these things? No, I can do this. As a Christian, I can do just about anything, but is it good for me to do it? That's the question you should be asking. It's not, is it legal for me to do it? Is it good for me to do it? And if Christians would start asking that question, then a lot of stuff that we do, we would stop doing, because we'd realize that just because I can do it, just because God may not give me a chastisement over this particular thing, doesn't mean that it's spiritually healthy for me to do this. It's not productive in my spiritual life if I follow this path. So when it comes to Christmas, that's where our question's at now then. Okay, legally, yes, you can do it. But is it spiritually productive for you to do it? Is it helpful? There's where the questions about idolatry start to be answered. So we understand verse 24 tells us to let no man seek his own, but every man another man's wealth. So he's telling you that what's about to follow is not really about you so much as it is about the others, about people who are watching you and how your decisions affect them. And so we'll see that. There are other passages that put this in the context of you. This one's more about how your decisions affect others. But before even we go deeper into that, I actually want to step back a little bit and get the context before this, because this is where you really get a better understanding about idols. And that's jumping back to verse 19. It says, "What say I then? That the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? But I say that the thing which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils, and not to God. And I would not that ye should have fellowship with devils. Ye cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. Ye cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and the table of devils. Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he?" So the question here that you have to understand is, in asking yourself honestly, is your Christmas celebration, the way you do it, is it something that honors God or not? You have to ask the question is, am I mixing devils with it? Am I participating in idolatry? Because this is the context of this passage here. Everything we've just learned about all things being expedient and all things being lawful but not expedient, and let no man seek his own wealth, and what we're about to learn as we go into talking about the conscious, it's in relation to this comment about trying to participate in the worship of devils and the worship of God. Because Paul explains to the Corinthian church that an idol is nothing. It's a statue. It's a made-up God. It's not real, but there is a devil behind that statue that is real. And there is a person who attaches themselves to that in their belief that to them it's real, even though it's not. It's just a statue, because they don't understand that. They give their belief to it in their heart. So verse 25, as we drop back down, now that we've got a little bit more context, we know what we're getting into. We're getting into a passage that's about mixing idolatry with the worship of God, and back, vice versa. We're dealing with a passage that's asking you to step back and consider if what you're doing is really good for you. And it's a passage asking you to consider how your actions affect other people. So then verse 25 says, "Whatsoever is sold in shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake." So this goes back to the idea of eating the food that's offered to idols, that he's telling you if you go to the market where they sell that food. So again, European, if you're going to the halal market and you're buying halal food, you're probably going to give yourself some food poisoning or something based on my experience with it. But it is cheaper, and that's what the shambles market was. It was food that was cheaper because it was meant to be used for sacrifice. And so he's saying, if you're going there and you're buying it, that's fine. Don't ask them what it is. Don't, because once you know, you're held accountable to what you know, because then there's an influence, there's a power involved in that. So he's saying, if you go, don't ask them, for example, if you go to the halal market, don't ask them what prayer they prayed over this chicken before they butchered it. Don't go into the details. Don't worry. Just realize it's just a piece of chicken. They can do whatever they can pray all they want to over it, as long as you're not involved. You're not participating actively in worship. It's not your problem that they did that. Then verse 26 says, "For the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof." So going back to the chicken, the chicken that's God's. They can pray over all they want to. They can pray to their false gods, but as long as you're not part of that worship, just keep away from it. Don't ask them about it. Just stay out of it. And you can buy the chicken and eat it. You can give thanks to God. That's why he says, something about, and why am I evil spoken of that for which I gave thanks, down in verse 30, is because of this idea, this understanding that these things are not inherently evil. That chicken was just a chicken. What they did was evil, but you're not involved in that. If we're gonna start asking so many questions, get ourselves in trouble, then you might find out the house you're living in was involved in some form of devil worship of some kind. You never know what the person living there before you did. You may find out the car you drive was involved in something evil if you start asking questions all the time about that stuff. Some things is better off you just don't know and go on with your life so that you have a clean conscience and so that others, as we're going to see in this passage, don't think less of you and your God. Now, he says in verse 27, if any of them that believe not, so an unbeliever, bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go. So if somebody asks you to come to their feast who's an unbeliever, you feel like you should go. Whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake. So he's saying for conscience sake. Now you're saying a minute, it's not your conscience he's talking about, actually, it's theirs. But he's saying for conscience sake, if you're invited. So let's say somebody invites me to their house who's an unbeliever, and I go to their house because I feel like I should go. He tells me to sit down, eat whatever they offer me, and don't ask them what's in it or what it is. If there's any chance of there being something that would be a moral issue. Because if I don't know that they prayed something over it before I ate it, then they don't look down on me for eating it. I don't have to worry about even my conscience, even though that's not really the context here. It saves you a lot of trouble if you don't worry about it sometimes. Now, verse 29 says, conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? So here's the question he's asking. Why? Why does it matter if I'm legally free to do this? Why does it matter what somebody else thinks about it? He says in verse 30, for if I by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I gave thanks? So he's saying, if I did everything right for God, why does somebody speak evil of me? I took this as a gift from God, and I gave thanks for it, and I was happy to have it. So why does somebody speak evil of me for doing that? And here's where you really start to understand the responsibility of what he's talking about in this passage. He says, whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. Now, I want you to really take these principles because I'm going to ask you in a moment to apply these to your understanding of Christmas. So whatever we're going to do, it should be done to give glory to God. If you're going to participate in it, it should be done to give glory to God. Give none offense, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God. So you shouldn't be giving any opportunity to offend, Jews, Gentiles, or the church. So nobody should, be getting offended in what you're doing. You shouldn't be giving a place for them to look at that and say, how could a Christian do that? And then 33, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. So he says, if you're going to do something, whether it be sitting down to eat with somebody or whatever it is, if you're going to go do these things, then you need to make sure you're doing this to God's glory. So that's step one. Then step two is you need to make sure you're not doing it in a way that's going to give a chance for somebody to step back and say, how could a Christian do this, or to raise any of those kind of accusations. Step three is then you have to also ask, am I doing this in a way that can help point others to Christ, that it can help lead others to a saving knowledge of Him? Now, all of that is in reality what you need to know when looking at a holiday like Christmas that on the surface has a lot of good Christian reasons to celebrate it, but behind the scenes has a lot of paganism and things attached to it that justifiably should make you ask, should I celebrate this? And that's where you're going to find that the answer comes down to, it depends on how you celebrate Christmas. It all really comes down to the question of how do you celebrate it? So for me, again, if the argument's about the day, then I think you've missed the point. If the argument is about, most any of the things, the name, any of that kind of stuff, like we talked about in the beginning of this, then you missed the point. You're arguing over silly stuff to a certain degree. Now, the day has a little bit of fairness because of the fact that it is a day that has been used for paganism, but at the end of the day, this is almost falls under the category of asking a question for conscience sake, because I'm pretty sure the buildings half the people who tell me that they don't want to celebrate Christmas because of its pagan roots or because of some sinful attachment that's in there somewhere. Uh, the buildings they built their church in was probably a bar at some point. The building they built their church in was probably used for some great evil at some point. Most churches in the U.S. aren't built from the ground up until they get a little bit bigger in membership. So most Christians have had to start their church in a building that you may not even know what it was used for, and a lot of you don't want to know what it was used for. But you don't worry about that because you're not using it for that anymore. You're using it as an opportunity to honor God, to point others to Christ. And so when you go in, if there was a bar in the back, because it used to be a bar, you tear that out. If it looked like a bar outside, you clean it up and make it look nice, because you don't want to give any occasion for stumbling. You don't want to give any chance where somebody who doesn't understand, because I didn't read the passage and I won't, because I got a lot I want to say still. But 1 Corinthians 8:5-7 talks about this idea that some people don't understand that an idol is just a statue. They regard it and believe that it has power. Even amongst believers, there's people who don't understand that. That there may be a devil behind that statue, but that statue itself is just a rock. I can smash it. I can do whatever I want to it, because that statue has no power whatsoever. But they regard it that way. And because of that, I have to be careful with them. So knowing that and knowing that some people don't get it, that's why we have to be careful. That's why we want our church to look like what people should imagine a church to look like to some degree. Now, as I pastor a church that's very international, I find out more and more that people's opinions of what that means are very different. So at some point, I just have to stay the course and go the direction I feel is best. But at the end of the day, I have to make sure that the way in which we're doing, because the building we're using right now, it's been about everything you can think of. They sold music there, so you can guarantee they sold ungodly music in the building. People have lived there. You can know that surely there was men living with women outside of marriage, probably stuff even beyond that. There's a lot of things that have happened in that building, but does that mean that we can't use it as a church anymore? No, because we're using it in a way that's completely separated from all of that. And this is what I'm going to come to with Christmas as my conclusion of the matter. Now, I'm not done teaching, but my conclusion of how this fits into Christmas. If you celebrate Christmas and you're still bound to the Catholic and the pagan traditions, then yes, it's wrong. You're doing it wrong. If you're not celebrating it purely in what you see in the Bible, but you're attaching tradition to it that's not in the Bible, then you're celebrating it wrong. So if you are participating in things that were part of the Yule holiday and part of paganism, you're hanging up mistletoe in your house to kiss strangers, you're doing, any of that kind of stuff, then yeah, you're wrong. But I'll take it a step further. If what you're doing is not done to honor God and is not pointing people to know God better and to come to know Christ as Savior, you're also doing it wrong. There's no reason for you to be celebrating that holiday. And here's where I get it, because I think any of my audience, anybody who's actually going to come on a video with me and listen to it and made it this far, I don't have to go through the pagan things because you already understand that these things we shouldn't be participating in. Some of it doesn't really matter because it's not attached. There are some things that historically would have probably been pagan worship, but they've been so far removed from that you have to twist, 3 different history books and try to make it look like it's paganism today. That those things I'm not worried about. But in terms of things that are clearly pagan worship, we know it's pagan worship and never lost that context, then yeah, I don't think there's anybody here that would disagree with me. But where I see this to be more troubling, especially with the Americans that I know, is it's not the paganism that's the issue. It's the modern American Christmas that's the issue. It's that Christmas in America has little to nothing to do with God. So if I'm going to do this, I should be doing it to the glory of God. But how is making a holiday that was intended to celebrate the birth of my Savior entirely about a fictional character and his fictional army of servants and his fictional pets, and then convincing a generation after generation of children that this person is real? How is that honoring God? You cannot. You can twist it. I mean, you can tell me that, oh, I'm going to teach my children that they do this in honor of God, but in reality, you can't tell me. There is a principle of it's never right to do wrong to get a chance to do right. I know it's not a Bible statement, but it's a principle that is within Scripture and a very good principle to measure things by. So when it comes to any excuse somebody could use for celebrating, and here's your warning: if you don't want the jolly old fat man to be attacked, this is your chance to tag out, because I'm going full into it now. But when it comes to Santa Claus, there is no justification anybody could ever give me for celebrating Christmas and putting Santa Claus in it. I don't care what people want to come with. You cannot justify it, because you can never tell me, even if you're going to tell me that I'm going to use this as a chance to teach my children about how there was theoretically a Saint Nicholas who did this, or I'm going to use this as an opportunity to teach my children about giving so that they'll learn to appreciate God's gifts. Whatever you want to use to try to say that, there is a clear line drawn here, because you are telling them that this person who does not exist is real. You can never tell me it's right to lie to your children to get a chance to hopefully, maybe, just maybe, take a little bit of that lie and teach them about God's through it somehow. Now, saying that and understanding what that means for you is when you start trying to apply these principles to Christmas. Let's say the Christmas tree, for example, because that's the one people try to use a verse from the Bible and argue about the Christmas tree. And I'll come back to Santa Claus. I'm not done with him. But when you talk about the Christmas tree, the passages people would use, for example, would be Jeremiah, and I'll read it for you. Jeremiah 10 and verse 2 through 4. Sorry. Jeremiah 10, verses 2 through 4. This is one of those passages people would use against the Christmas tree. It says, "Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them." So there is a warning about heathen, but there's also a context that, don't base your religion off of the signs of heaven. You don't base your life off of it. Don't follow astrology and so forth. There's a warning against all of that. There's a clear Bible warning never to build your doctrine on those kind of things or to base your life off of those things. So that is the context of don't learn the way of the heathen. But as you follow and take that principle, don't learn the way of the heathen. Verse 3 says, "For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and gold, and fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not." Let's read more, I think, than what I said I would read. I think I said I'd do verse 4. I'm trying to do verse 5. "They are upright as palm tree, but they speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good. For as much as there is none like unto thee, O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in might." Now, there's more in this passage. I would encourage you, if when you read that you still think he's talking about a Christmas tree, that you actually study this out further, because what he's talking about is idol. He's talking about somebody literally cutting down a tree, casing it in silver and gold. You laying it with silver and gold. So it's covered in silver or gold, one of the two, all over. And then, having made a statue out of it, you fasten it somewhere in your house and you worship it. Now, in terms of Christmas tree, unless you are literally worshiping your tree, if you put up that tree and you're dancing around singing "Old Christmas tree, old Christmas tree," you're putting the adoration and praise upon the Christmas tree, then yes, you need to step back and realize that there is a problem. If you can't celebrate Christmas without it, if it's the whole meaning of Christmas for you, then yes, there is a problem. But if you're decorating it and putting it in your house, I mean, God had them carving images of trees and stuff in the temple. There's plenty of things to show that God's not against trees being brought into houses to make them look nice, nor flowers or any of that stuff. At some point, people get ridiculous with that. But if you're putting too much adoration on it, then yes, because when you put too much adoration upon something, it becomes an idol to you, because you are adoring it. You're giving it praise and undue level of precedence in your life. You're putting it too high on the pedestal. And if your Christmas tree is like that for you, even though nobody carved it, nobody laid it in gold, and nobody made a literal idol out of it, it can become an idol to you. Because I know not to pick on people who buy real trees, because actually here in Belgium, they're relatively cheap. I don't blame you for it. But I know people in America who pay hundreds of dollars to get the perfect tree they want. They take it home, they spend hours upon hours decorating it, they pour their heart and soul into it, and they stand in awe of it. For me, I appreciate when a child looks at the tree and they say "wow" because they like the lights. But when an adult stands in awe of that tree for too long, at some point there starts to be a little bit of an issue, because you are going towards the area of idolatry. So the statement about a tree is this: that there's actually nothing morally wrong with you bringing flowers or trees or whatever, or decorating them in your house. It's how you decorate your house. There's nothing wrong with you doing it as part of Christmas, especially because you can use it to teach some of the principles you want. For example, I've already started teaching with Josiah. Emily gets it by proxy, but more so with Josiah, that the reason we use an evergreen tree is because it helps us to see a picture of everlasting life. The tree itself helps us to think about Christ, who hung on the tree for us as he was nailed to the cross. There's the ways you can teach this, and you can use it to point your children to Christ, and that's fine. Just don't teach them to adore the Christmas tree. Teach them to adore Christ. If you can use the tree to do that, it's fine. When it comes to giving presents, for example, there are so many people who go way too far out. They bankrupt themselves. They ruin Christmas for themselves because they think they have to get the perfect present for everybody, and they're just overwhelmed with this desire to make sure everybody gets unreasonably expensive gifts and so forth, and it becomes idolatry at some point, because you covet this. You covet the praise of the people. People covet the gifts. Their whole Christmas is ruined because they didn't get this really expensive gift they wanted. And there's a point where gift giving becomes idolatry. But anybody listening to this would be crazy to say it's wrong to give gifts. I mean, I understand, like, if you don't know your Bible and you're reading the book of Proverbs and it talks about gifts as a bad thing there, understand he's talking about bribes. He's talking about giving a gift to a king as a bribe, or giving a gift to a judge as a bribe, to pay them, like lobbyists, paying them to vote your way. Yeah, that's wrong. But when it comes to giving, Jesus said, according to Acts 20, verse 35, Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive. God loves a cheerful giver. Now, he's talking about giving to him at that point, but God still set the example for us. And when we give gifts, use it as a chance. I use the gifts of the wise men to teach my children about Jesus and who he is. Why wouldn't I use giving gifts to them to teach them about God's love and his unspeakable gift when he gave his only begotten son? So all of that is pointing to this idea that in general, there's nothing wrong with celebrating Christmas. It's when you start putting adoration in the wrong places and when you start participating in things you shouldn't. So let me put it this way, for example. Most people don't watch Frosty the Snowman and tell their children that Frosty is a real person. They sing the song, they have fun with it, and they move on. They know Frosty is just a cartoon. So I have little issue with Frosty the Snowman. I don't have tremendous with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, because most people teach their children it's just a cartoon and they get it. I take tremendous alt with Santa Claus. Santa Claus is the idol of Christmas, and you cannot deny it. People wait in line for hours for their children to sit on some stranger's lap because he dressed up like their idol. People put statues of him in their yard and all around their house. And if you don't feel like it's an idol, let me ask you, because this was the thing that turned me, because I grew up, I was not the person who really loved Christmas, but I grew up never having a problem with it. I had the Christmas movies, I enjoyed the Christmas celebrations. I just wasn't somebody who liked to decorate. But I was the biggest gift giver you've probably ever seen. I would come to family celebrations with a sack that would make Santa envious to see all the gifts I was giving out. I mean, I had the belly for it and the gifts for it too. In fact, I even dressed up like Santa Claus and went to my mom's school one time and gave out candy to the kids because I loved Christmas. But the thing that finally broke me and helped me to see that Santa is not a character, he is an idol, was the fact that I began to realize that as I started to meet Christians who didn't celebrate Christmas, or Christians who didn't teach their children about Santa Claus, that they had to give an explanation for that. They had to fight with people about that. People would criticize them and get upset with them because they didn't teach their children about Santa Claus. And I sat back and I thought about that for a moment. I had people in my own family who criticized me and told me good luck finding a wife who'll be as legalist as you, who'll be this as you. I had friends and stuff say that to me. I had people in my church say that to me when I told them that I think I've made the decision I don't want to teach any children I'll have about Santa Claus, that I'll teach them that he's fake, that he's not real. And I said it very plainly, he's why would I lie to my kids? It's a sin to lie. I tell them it's a sin to lie, and then I lie and tell them it's all in fun and games. I remember how much it broke my heart. I beat my brother with my fist when he told me that Santa wasn't real because I refused to accept it. And I was a bully anyways. But when he finally told me, I beat him and I cried like a baby because I took it to heart and it was real to me. Why would I do that? But what amazed me was that when I said that to people, and when I began to teach that to people and help try to get them to understand why I was taking the stand that I did, they got infuriated with me. People, it was like I had walked into a Muslim community and said something bad about Allah. It was like I had went into a Hindu temple and started munching down on a cheeseburger. It was unbelievable to see the reaction of Christians who did not like the fact that I wasn't going to lie to my children like they lied to their children. They were tremendously upset with me about all of that and couldn't accept it. But then I sat back and I asked myself something. Why don't they get mad at their friends who don't tell their children about Jesus at Christmas? Why don't they get upset that their friends don't talk about Jesus? They get upset that I don't have a Santa Claus in my yard, but they don't care if I have a manger scene in my yard. They would be upset if they didn't have a Christmas tree in their house. If they didn't have gifts, it would be the end of the world. But they don't care whether they make it to church on Christmas Sunday to celebrate the birth of Christ. You think about that for a moment. When you reach that point, Christmas is not about Christ to you. You already took Christ out of Christmas. You don't have to worry about how they spell it on the card. You already did it. You made it about somebody else. You made an idol when you let Santa become more important than Christ. And I know I'm preaching to people predominantly who live in other countries, especially living here in Belgium, that that's not really an issue. That most people, here that I'm preaching to, my church especially, it's not really an issue for you because you already understand this. You've not been brought up in that American mindset to where if you don't tell your children about Santa Claus, then you're abusive to them almost. You're an awful parent. But how does that make any sense? How does it ever make sense to lie to your children about and spend years convincing them that somebody exists that doesn't, only to then turn around later and tell them, well, it was actually a lie. I was giving you the gifts and I just didn't want you to give me credit for it, I guess. I wanted you to think that some guy who lived in a magical world was the one doing this for you. It's insanity when you really think about it. There's no logic behind it at all until you realize what it's really about. I don't care where the stories of Santa Claus began. I don't care what you're going to comment with and say, well, say Nicholas was a real person and he did this. And so I know all those stories because I grew up with it. And that's why you can comment it, but I'm not going to worry about it. I might even delete it just because I don't care about that, because it doesn't matter what that was. It matters what it is. And what it is it is a distraction to keep people from caring about Christ at the time where we're supposed to be celebrating his birth. It is a distraction by propping up an idol that will keep people distracted. And while you got Christians over here fighting about whether a Christmas tree is an idol because there's a verse that talks about carving an idol out of a tree, who don't even begin to understand their Bible enough to realize what they're doing. And you got Christians who argue that they don't like Christmas because it's Christ Mass. You got Christians who argue they don't like Christmas because we celebrate it close to other pagan holidays that have existed historically, and probably even in replacement of one of those holidays, if we're going to be honest. And they're arguing about those silly things. And you have this great division to where everybody's missed the point. So the answer of why do we celebrate it is because the birth of Christ is worth celebrating, but you need to do it the right way. The birth of Christ is worthy of celebrating. And for anyone who's still struggling with Santa Claus being called an idol, let me show you something. You look at this picture, it's just one picture you can find on the internet of people waiting hours. It's not even a man in a suit this time. It's an inflatable Santa Claus. But people will line up and stand and wait their turn for their child to take a picture with this idol. It is an idol. It's not, he doesn't move by himself, he doesn't do anything. It's just something there to keep your focus off of Jesus. Or how about this one of people lined up in the mall there in America and understand that the line is going way beyond where the picture captures, and people will stand for hours upon hours, all day long. The line will be like this. People will pay fortune to get their child to take a picture with a man who you have no idea who he is, who your child is sitting on his lap, uh, who apparently some of them are good guys. I have a guy who was my friend. I love this guy who used to be a mall Santa. So don't think I'm against the people. I'm against the principle. I'm against the concept. But you have this guy who you have no idea who he is, and you're putting your child on his lap, and you're paying money to get a picture with this person who's not real. Now, here's why, for example, I'm not going to fuss at you if you're going to Disneyland and taking a picture with Mickey Mouse. You don't tell your child that Mickey Mouse is real, but you tell them that Santa Claus is. You don't tell your child that they should be singing songs about Mickey Mouse and putting the emphasis on Mickey Mouse when it's actually time that we're supposed to be celebrating Christ. Now, if you're going to Disneyland on Sunday, yeah, I might say something to you about it. If you're on Sunday telling your kids to watch Mickey Mouse cartoons in church because it's more important than actually teaching them about Christ, then yeah, we got a problem. But in general, you teach him that he's a cartoon character. That's why when it comes to Christmas, I'm not going to fuss at you about Frosty. Probably not about Rudolph, because I don't know too many children who actually believe them to be real. But most children grow up, in America at least, being taught that Santa Claus is real and having no real knowledge or understanding about the birth of Christ. And that shows you that there is an idolatry that has been brought into this celebration that has turned the hearts of generation after generation. And why do we celebrate Christmas? The answer, again, is because the birth of Christ is worth celebrating. But you better make sure it's not mingled with idolatry, because there are generations out there that you're supposed to be doing whatever you do to the glory of God. And standing in a line like that to go see Santa Claus, you can't tell me it's bringing glory to God. Teaching your children a lie, you can't tell me it's bringing glory to God. You're supposed to not be doing anything that would cause an occasion to stumble. I mean, when people see the dedication of most Christians to celebrating a fake person, or the fact that they lied, I mean, you think about that. Most people in the world, like comedians, celebrities, and stuff, will call out Christians for lying to their children about Santa Claus. They understand the hypocrisy of that. That you preach, "Thou shalt not lie," you spank your child for lying, and then you lie to them. They understand that. So don't tell me you're not giving an occasion for stumbling to your children and to that person, because that is one of the principles. And the other principle was you're supposed to be using every opportunity that you do something like this to point people to Christ. You tell me how taking this emphasis off of Christ and putting it on an idol points people to Christ. I would love to have somebody explain that to me, because there's nothing in that that makes any sense whatsoever. So maybe I hit this one a little bit rougher than what you expected me to. And maybe I was a little more fair in some points than what you expected, because you probably expected me to come down against those who are against Christmas. But in reality, most of them have a good reason. I just think they're taking it to a point that's beyond what God has put on them. That they are the person in Romans 14 who won't eat meat because they think they're not supposed to, but they don't have enough understanding to realize they're allowed to. I think they're in that category. That's fine. I'm not gonna despise them for that. They're welcome to be that way. Just like I expect them not to condemn me for disagreeing. That's okay. We need to respect each other in that cause. But what we don't need to respect, and what we do need to take a stand against, is the idolatry and the lies that are being put in the place of something that's meant to be celebrating Christ. Now, as I said with Halloween and with Thanksgiving, I'm not really going to take much time for any kind of questions. If you want to type one super fast and it's a good question, I'll try to answer you, but I'm going to try to keep this video a little bit shorter. Not shorter. I'm already way past my normal time. Normally, I should have closed 8 minutes ago minimum. Anyways, I'll try not to go past an hour mark, because I do want the video to be accessible to people. So if you have a question and you want to type it out really fast, you help yourself with that, and I'll do my best to answer it. If not in person, maybe in comment, or not in video. I mean, in comment, I might be able to. But let me just come back to that idea that if you regard the day, regard it as unto the Lord. If you don't regard it, then just don't regard it. If you don't want to celebrate Christmas, you're not obligated to. Nobody in the Bible tells you to celebrate it. You don't have to. And God completely gives you permission for that. Go read Romans 14, go read Colossians 2, read the passage there, and you'll see you're completely welcome to not celebrate. But also understand that I have every God given permission to celebrate it. And the fact that you can link it or trace it to other stuff, that's what First Corinthians is showing you. That is not an excuse to tell me I'm not allowed to celebrate Christmas. I am perfectly allowed to celebrate it. Now, where the line is drawn is there are some things that people do for Christmas I'm not allowed to celebrate it. You cannot be truly serving God and following God at Christmas and be celebrating Santa Claus. I know I'm going to hurt some friends' feelings, especially those in America, but you cannot celebrate Santa Claus and lie to your children and grandchildren, whatever, and think that you're doing the will of God and you're honoring God. Lying is one of those things that we know to be a sin. There's no question about it that it's wrong to do that. So there are places you can go in your celebration that are evil, but the celebration itself is not. All right, I don't see any questions coming in. Yeah, I've already addressed this, but I'll read what Sophania says on it 'cause it's fair. It says, just to add, maybe it was said, but my parents also gave the reason that it is dangerous to lie to children about Santa Claus or Santa Claus uh, because they might also doubt about the truth of the Bible and Jesus. You break the trust of a child. And that's a very good. No, I talked about this to a degree. I didn't go quite to that point. I meant to because it was in my mind while I was talking about it, and I implied it. But to actually say it straightforward, I'm glad you mentioned it because I don't know that I actually said that straight that exact point that you break the trust of a child. I mostly focused on the dangers of lying to them, while also talking about the fact we better be careful about giving a reason for people to stumble. So I know I hit all around it, but whether I hit that exact note or not, I'm not sure. So let's make sure we get that in there. All right. I appreciate we had a good number of people as a part of this study. I appreciate you being a part of it. The one thing maybe I could hit as I get ready to close out is the reason why I would recommend that you celebrate Christmas. It's your choice. That's what this whole lesson has been about. The reason I'd recommend you do it, but do it right, is because it gives you a good opportunity to teach your children about the birth of Christ. Because we've already said that every holiday you choose to celebrate, you should choose to celebrate it so as to teach your children about the birth of Christ. And let me close by reading one passage that we read in our study on Thanksgiving. Exodus 12:22. Exodus 12 and verse 22 says this, and ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin, and none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. So if you don't know, this is Passover. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your house to smite you. And ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he has promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass, your children shall say unto you, what mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the house of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshiped. I would recommend you celebrate it only if you're going to celebrate it like that. That when your children see the traditions you choose to implement and the things you choose to do, that it points their heart to Christ. and tells them about Christ, who came as God's perfect gift, who hung upon the tree, who gave himself to die for us that we might have everlasting life, that he is the light of the world. You want to put lights on your tree? Tell them it's because he's the light of the world. You want to put a tree, put an evergreen, so you can tell them that it's the gift of everlasting life. You put your gifts under the tree, talk about God's gift he put on the tree. When you put the star, the angel, whatever, make sure you find your way to tie that back in and talk about how God marked the birth of the Savior with the star, or how the angels glorified him at his birth. But find your way to teach these things to your children. That's why you should celebrate the holidays you celebrate. So why do we celebrate it? Always comes down to the birth of Christ being worthy of celebration. But if you're going to do it, you should do it to teach your children and keep it in your home so that you and them are taking the time to give honor to this most honorable event. All right. I hope that all makes sense. I appreciate you all being here. We had a good number of people involved in tonight's study, and I appreciate you being a part of it. Please do remember, tomorrow night there is no service at the church. It's been moved to Friday night for Christmas Eve. If you can be there, please join us for the Christmas Eve service. Thank you again. Hope you have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon.